In the beginning segment, we start with the rise of radical Islam coming out of Egypt through the extensive work produced by acclaimed independent BBC documentarian Adam Curtis. However, because of recent changes with YouTube policies regarding copyright protections and censorship, I'm restricted to using his work. So in order to keep the story leading up to 1993 somewhat chronicle and captivating, original scenes used from Curtis's 2004 film The Powers of Nightmares are plagiarized and adapted. The story begins in the summer of 1949, when a middle-aged school inspector from Egypt arrived in the small town of Greeley, Colorado. His name was Sayyid Qutb. Qutb had been sent to the U.S. to study its educational system, and he enrolled in a local state college. His photographs appear in the college yearbook, but Qutb was destined to become much more than a school inspector. Out of his experiences of America that summer, Qutb was going to develop a powerful set of ideas that would directly inspire those who flew the planes on the attacks of September the 11th. As he had traveled across the country, Qutb had become increasingly disenfranchised with America. The very things on the surface that made the country look prosperous and happy, Qutb saw as signs of inner corruption and decay. In 1950, Sayyid Qutb traveled back to Egypt from America. On his return, Qutb became politically active in Egypt. He joined a group called the Muslim Brotherhood, who wanted Islam to play a major role in governing Egyptian society. And in 1952, the Brotherhood supported the revolution led by General Nasser that overthrew the last remnants of British rule. But Nasser very quickly made it clear that the new Egypt was going to be a secular society that emulated Western morals. He quickly forged an alliance with America, and the CIA came to Egypt to organize security agencies for the new regime. Faced with this, the Muslim Brotherhood began to organize against Nasser, and in 1954, Qutb and other leading members of the Brotherhood were arrested by the security services. In a series of books he wrote secretly in prison, which were then smuggled out, Qutb called a revolutionary vanguard to rise up and overthrow the leaders. Faced with this, Nasser decided to crush Qutb and his ideas, and in 1966, Qutb was put on trial for treason. The verdict was a foregone conclusion, and on August 29, 1966, Qutb was executed. But his ideas lived on. The day after his execution, a young schoolboy set up a secret group. He hoped that it would one day become the vanguard that Qutb had hoped for. His name was Ayman Zawahirii, and Zawahirii later became the mentor of Osama bin Laden. By the late 1970s, Egypt had been transformed. On the surface, it had become a modern westernized state with a prosperous middle class who were benefiting from the flood of Western capital that was being invested in the country. One member of this prosperous Egyptian elite was Ayman Zawahirii. He was now a young doctor, just starting his career. The group that he had started as a schoolboy, which he had modeled on the ideas of Sayyid Qutb, had grown. Sayyid Qutb's ideas were now spreading rapidly in Egypt, above all among students. The government of President Sadat was controlled by a small group of millionaires who were backed by Western banks. The banks had been let in by what Sadat called his open door policy. To the Western media, Sadat denied any corruption. All Egyptians knew that this was a blatant lie.
Who has benefited now from the open door policy? Taxi drivers, the laborers, all those has benefited from the open door policy. It is not like they say that there are millionaires here and so. No, not at all. This is pure black propaganda from the side of the Soviet Union and his agents here in the country.
Zawahirii was convinced that the time was now approaching to fulfill Qutb's vision. The vanguard should rise up and overthrow this corrupt regime, and the man who would give the Islamists the opportunity would be Henry Kissinger. As part of his attempt to create a stable and balanced world, Kissinger had persuaded President Sadat to begin peace negotiations with Israel. To Kissinger, the ruthless pragmatist, religious divisions and hatreds were irrelevant, and in 1977, Sadat had flown to Jerusalem to start the peace process. To the West, it was a heroic act, but to the Islamists, it was complete betrayal. And then, in 1979, the Ayatollah Khomeini, although Shiite, showed Zawahirii by example that his dream of creating an Islamist state was possible. Khomeini had inspired an uprising against the Shah of Iran. The Shah was another leader who had allowed Western banks to corrupt his country. Khomeini had put forth the idea of an Islamist state that was remarkably similar to Qutb's ideas.
You sound very dissatisfied with what's happening in Iran now.
Not more than dissatisfied. This is disgraceful, really. I was a Secretary General of the Muslim Congress at one time. This, putting the name Islamic Revolution is a crime against Islam in the first hand.
And President Sadat, do you expect that the Shah will accept the invitation? It seems like a good solution right now.
Quote me, my aeroplane is ready to bring him here, any moment.
At the end of 1980, Amy Zawahirii, with a number of other followers of Qutb who had formed cells, came together. They created an organization they called Islamic Jihad. Its leader was a man called Abdel Salam Faraj, and Faraj argued that they should kill Sadat in a spectacular way that would shock the masses.
Sadat is killed in the attack, and justice comes swiftly.
Those who carried out the assassination were a group of army officers who were part of Islamic Jihad. They were immediately arrested, and the regime launched a massive manhunt for those behind the plot.
Sadat's murderer is arrested on sight. He is a lieutenant in the Egyptian army. Yet the incident results in over 300 Islamists being put in jail. Behind bars are the future leaders of Islamist organizations, still active around the world today. The massive presence of the International Press Corps will give them an exceptional platform to speak from, starting with their self-proclaimed spokesman, Ayman al-Zawahirii.
This is our word by Dr. Ayman Zawahirii. Now we want to speak to the whole world. Who are we? Who are we? Why did they bring us here? And what we want to say? About the first question, we are Muslims. We are Muslims who believed in their religion, in its broad meaning, as both an ideology and practice. We believed in our religion, both as an ideology and practice, and hence we tried our best to establish this Islamic state and Islamic society. La ilaha illallah! La ilaha illallah!
With the peace agreement, it was a fundamental realignment in that we are now going to accept Israel's right to exist. We're now going to have a normal relationship with Israel. There was a segment of die-hard Islamists who just couldn't accept that.
For a Muslim like the blind sheikh, Sadat's signature on that peace treaty is a declaration of war on his own people. It is believed that the sheikh issued the fatwa that became Sadat's death sentence.